Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today I'm going to take a look at one of the firearms that I own. We cover any age in history from the Stone Age right up to the 1950s. When firearms start getting used in the Middle Ages onwards, I'm quite fortunate to have those weapons. So the earliest weapon I've got, which is a replica sadly, is a medieval gun, one of the early medieval guns, which was nothing more than a block of wood with an iron tube on the top. And the interesting thing about that is when you load it with powder, you drop a ball in, or most commonly a little pebble down the end. You then fire it by the hand, using the hand. You touch fire it with some burning match cord, and it flashes, it bangs and fires. And it was a devastating weapon on the battlefield, more psychological than anything, because if you think of medieval people, the loudest thing they've ever heard is thunder. So when they see these guns being used, belching fire, making a loud noise, it would have terrified them in that period. Luckily, I then got 15th century medieval guns. In other words, they look a bit more like a gun now, and they actually have a trigger, even though it's a crossbow trigger, an S trigger. And then eventually I've got my 17th century muskets and so on. I find the evolution of weaponry really interesting, from the days of hand touching them up to the matchlocks, into what was often referred to as the dog lock, the fire lock, the flint lock, and then right up to the bolt action rifles. So luckily, because we cover such a wide range of history, it does allow me to have a full cross section of the weapons that was used long ago. But the weapon I'm going to show you today is not a medieval handgun. It's not my 17th century musket or even my Brown Bess. It is in fact this fine weapon here. This one is what's referred to quite commonly as the SMLE. It's also referred to as the SMLE, or most commonly by the make, which is Lee Enfield. This is my Lee Enfield, and this is referred to as the SMLE, the short magazine Lee Enfield. Now, this rifle was introduced into the British Army to be used for the main weapon, basically, in the early 20th century. And even though there are many different types of it, the Lee Enfield, even though it started life in the 20th century, the early 20th century, it went right up in British Army use anyway into the 1950s, where it was eventually taken over by the SLR. The big difference there is the SLR actually had gas parts attached to it, so it could be fired on repetition. You also find it's 7.62mm, whereas this rifle, like most of the Enfields, is actually 0.303 inch. Not a very big difference between them. It's mainly millimeters and inches more than anything. But this one is the short magazine Lee Enfield. Now, even though I said they stopped being used by the British Army in the 1950s, they continued to be used, Lee Enfields that is, for some countries after that as well. So you have them being used in Africa, you get them being used also in India by the Indian troops, by the African troops. And we also know that in the recent conflict in Afghanistan, there were members of the Taliban and terrorists that were still using them. And the main reason for that is they are very well made, and they're probably one of the most accurate rifles ever used by the British soldier. So this is my SMLE. This one was made by BSA, so Birmingham Small Arms, and it's 100 years old. This one, well, over 100 years old. This one was made in 1916. So I'm going to introduce you to this rifle. I'll also introduce you to how it fires. Obviously I'm not going to fire it, and I'll also show you the bayonet that attached to the top of it. Now, because I'm going to be pointing to things, I was always taught years ago to always point with something. So for this, I am going to use a round, and that's going to be my pointer for this. So we'll start at the very top. This is the muzzle of the rifle, just up there. And we have two protrusions. We've got this bit here and this bit here. That's actually part of the bayonet attachment point. So that's for attaching the bayonet to it. There we have the foresight. So you've got the blade in the middle, and these are guards to protect that blade from being damaged, bent or anything like that. And then towards the top we have this unusual little catch or bracket really. Some people incorrectly call this a sling loop. It's not a sling loop at all. This actually has a gap in the middle, and this is actually for piling arms. Years ago there was actually an order for piling arms, and if you look at some of the First World War photographs, you often see soldiers sat around drinking tea, resting, and you will see these rifles looking like a tripod. So what they've done is they've interlocked using the piling loop here, and they make a stand out of them so they can leave them resting upright, do whatever they want to do, but they're always close to hand for when they are needed. The barrel itself runs all the way through down to the breech right at the bottom end, and to protect the firer's hands when it's being fired, it's actually covered in woodwork. There is a lot of woodwork on this, and like I said, even though it's 100 years old, you do notice the odd dent in the woodwork, but apart from that, this weapon is in pristine condition, as they all were. But what you have to remember is rifles, you have to look after them, and soldiers did all the time, so it's made them last, and the fact that companies like BSA that made them to last. Anyway, as we move further down, this is the sling loop. That's the front sling loop that the sling attaches to. Some of the early rifles actually had leather slings, which is a hang-up from the earlier weapons like the Lee Metfords, the Longley Enfields, and even the Brown Besses, for example. But most of them were now being made out of canvas. And then you also have here the back sight, which is weird because whenever I fire a rifle, I always assume the back sight is actually down here, whereas on these weapons, the back sights for the SMLE, the SMLE, is halfway down the barrel. They're open sights as such really, so there's no tube to look through. You're literally looking through the little V section here and lining it up with the foresight at the bottom. Now these rifles have a range of really 1,000 yards, if not further than that. Not accurate, but they will hit a target at 1,000 yards. To change the elevation, to change the sighting, you just push in the little catch here on the side and it slides up and down. And the most accurate range to be engaging the enemy at with one of these is actually about 300 yards. But like I said, 1,000 yards easily, it will still hit something, but probably not accurately. As we move down, we then get to the important bit of the rifle really, and this is the breech. The breech is actually the internal part of it. The external part is actually the bolt. Now, some people will tell you the most important bit of the rifle is the safety catch. It is in a way, and when the safety catch is forward like I've got it here, that's now ready to fire, so it's off. So any normal time the safety catch will be to the rear, and when you're ready to use it, the safety catch is pushed forward. To operate the bolt, the safety catch has to be off. So I've pushed forward the safety catch, I lift up the bolt and I slide it back. It's a bolt action rifle, so it will only fire every time you open and close the bolt. So it's single shot, hand operated basically. The breech is located in there, and below the breech we have the magazine, a short magazine Lee Enfield. Even though inside the trigger guard's here, triggers there, inside the trigger guard, even though we've got a magazine release catch which we push in to take the magazine out, the magazines were rarely, if anything, taken off these weapons. It's not really designed for you to take a magazine off and put a new one on. You charge the magazine, you put the ammunition in the magazine from the breech entrance, from this entrance up here. I will show you that in a second. Now this rifle is an early rifle because this one still has attached to it its cut off, and the cut off was to enable this to fire single shot. So this would enable you to hand feed each round in without the next round jumping up from the magazine. These were taken off during the Great War, 1914-1918, and when you look at, for example, Dunkirk, the evacuation or the moving to the coast 80 years ago that's happening 80 years ago, most of their Lee Enfields, SMLEs, didn't have those on. They'd been taken off a lot earlier. So this shows it's quite an old rifle. It still has its bolt cut off on it. So there's our bolt, and I'll just close it and operate the trigger, and that's how it fires. I will put the safety catch back on, and then we'll finally move down to the bottom. So this is the butt, and at this end you have also got the rear sling loop. Inside the butt is a small secret compartment that holds your oil and pull through. It's a very, very clever compact rifle, basically. Very, very accurate, as I said. Anyway, it comes with a bayonet, and the bayonet is often referred to as a sword bayonet, which is incorrect because a sword bayonet is actually something else, but it's referring to the fact that it is pretty long, as you can see just of here. When bayonets were first invented, it was really to act like the old pikeman from long ago. In other words, when it was added to the end of the rifle, it kept horses away. But obviously, by the First and Second World War, it was also used for hand-to-hand combat. Now, how was this used? How was this rifle worked? Well, soldiers carried their ammunition in what was called a bandolier, very different from the bandoliers in the 17th century, and this cotton bandolier was often rolled up within ammunition pouches. Some ammunition pouches actually had the ammunition separately inserted anyway, but by the Second World War they were in ammunition pouches like that, or some bandoliers were actually worn across the body as they were in the 17th century. In each of the little compartments there are actually two chargers, and what I mean by a charger is this. This black object here is a charger, incorrectly referred to as clips usually. That's very much an American idea. They're called chargers, and each charger carries 5 rounds. We call it a round because the bullet is actually just the bit on the end. So how's this work? Well, very simply, the soldier will take a charger, he will push forward the safety catch, opens the bolt, and then he takes his one charge of 5, place it into the breech just there. There is a little catch for that to sit into, and then he will push down the ammunition into the magazine. This magazine will hold 10 rounds, so we will push down 2 charge clips in there, making that magazine now full. When he pushes forward the bolt, that will feed one of the rounds into the breech here. It's ready. The striker, the firing pin, is automatically held back by the mechanism inside, and then when you pull the trigger, the firing pin hits the base of the round, ignites the cordite, and the cordite creates the explosion, sending that bullet tip out of the end of the barrel. A good rifleman was meant to be able to operate the bolt and fire this thing 15 times in 1 minute, which takes some doing. 15 whole rounds in 1 minute. Aim shots, that is. However, there are some records of riflemen being able to put out 20 or even 25 rounds in 1 minute, which is quite an amazing feat if you ask me. But like I said, this is my own SMLE that I generally use for either work when I'm doing the Great War, or even when I'm doing work on the Home Guard. If you want to see any of the other rifles that I've got, if you want to see me demonstrate a Brown Bess musket, or if you want to see the Martini Henry made famous from the film Zulu, comment, let me know on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. So that's been a brief introduction to my SMLE, my over 100-year-old SMLE. All I have to say now is stay safe, and let us know what you want us to do a video on. Speak to you soon. Bye.